Now, the U.S. Labor Department's Bureau of Labor Statistics reported earlier this month that U.S. consumer prices in October posted their biggest annual gain in 31 years. And on Tuesday, U.S. President Joe Biden tapped the U.S. strategic oil reserves in a bid to reassure Americans angry about inflation and goods shortages as they head off to Thanksgiving. CGTN's Nathan King reports from the White House.
As Americans prepare for Thanksgiving on Thursday, President Biden is trying to assure or reassure them that they should be thankful for the state of the U.S. economy.
The fact is, America has a lot to be proud of. We're experiencing the strongest economic recovery in the world. Even after accounting for inflation, our economy is bigger and our families have more money in their pockets than they did before the pandemic. And America is the only major economy in the world that can say that.
But the surging price of everything, from the traditional turkey meal to the fuel that power their cars to drive them to see family and friends, are making consumers very nervous. And while the Biden administration tries to exude confidence, its decision to release 50 million barrels of oil from strategic reserves in a bid to lower prices suggests it's as nervous about inflation as everyone else. Inflation hasn't been this bad in more than 30 years, and with supply chains still snarled, Christmas presents will be hard to find and cost more. Thanks could give way to anger. Then there's the ever-present threat of a winter COVID-19 resurgence, adding to the uncertainty. President Biden, touting his recent legislative success on U.S. infrastructure, says Americans are already better off by nearly $100 a month, and says that his Build Back Better bill will deliver even more. But the opinion polls tell a slightly different story. Biden's approval rating in the polls hovers around 43%. And there's a real fear amongst White House officials here and Democrats generally that with midterm elections for Congress and elsewhere just a year away, that Americans' economic anxieties could lead to political reversal for the White House and Democrats in 2022. Nathan King, CGTN, at the White House.
Well, oil reserves are used by countries around the world in case of emergencies, and U.S. strategic oil reserves total over 600 million barrels, and that's enough to last 1 month. The reserves are located in the coast of Texas and Louisiana, and the U.S. says the release has been coordinated with 5 other countries. India has agreed to release 5 million barrels, the UK 1.5 million, and Japan will auction off 4.2 million barrels from its reserves. China and South Korea have yet to release details on the amount and the timing of their releases. Supply chain problems and high prices on goods ranging from electronics to produce have become all too common for U.S. families as the economy emerges from pandemic shutdowns. Meat is part of this trend. Meat prices are rising at their fastest rate in 30 years, disrupting how families and businesses shop and dine out. And CGTN's Anissa Soledad Perez has more from Miami.
There's one more reason to go vegan. That juicy steak that so many enjoy, well, went up in price by 25% thanks to inflation. And it's not just steaks getting pricier. Pork, ham, and bacon as well. Analysts have coined a new term for this, meatflation. The CEO of Meat & Bone, a premium online butcher shop, says he's feeling the pinch.
We've seen prices increase all over the board, driven by shortage of labor, by increased prices for feed, processing, fuel, and mostly transportation. We're seeing customers come a little bit, they're aware of the price increases, so they're expecting them, but sometimes they're shocked to see that a steak they would buy a year ago for $30 is now going for $45.
Mata says that he's doing his best not to pass these sharp increases to his meat-loving customers. For restaurants, it's even harder.
I have to remove the skirt steak, which was one of the most popular.
I know.
But it went up like 30% up. So to me didn't make sense.
And the other favorite that actually made the cut and stayed on the menu, the ribeye, went from $54 to $68. Both businessmen report steady sales during these harsh times, and it's because consumers still love to savor a good steak during a nice dinner out. Despite sustainable environment calls to eat less red meat, global demand for it has grown over the past 50 years, and meat production has more than tripled, according to the online publication Our World in Data. Do you think these high prices will continue throughout the entire holiday season? Thanksgiving is next week, then we have Christmas. So what do you forecast?
We were hoping to see a decrease right before the holidays, but at this point, I don't expect any price decreases. If anything, I would expect some price increases between now and the end of the year.
Meatflation is a worldwide trend, with meat prices rising from Brazil to the Philippines. With supply chain-driven disruptions, we're all paying more and getting less. And this staple of the global diet is no exception. Nitza Soledad Perez, CGTN, Miami.
And now Professor Michael Powers is joining us from Beijing over Skype to discuss this. He's from Tsinghua University's Department of Finance, School of Economics and Management. Professor, welcome to Global Watch. Well, first of all, the US now is the world's largest oil producer. So why are Americans paying so much to fill up their tanks?
I think first we should note that although the United States is indeed a large oil producer, not all of the oil that it produces is consumed domestically. In fact, the United States does have to rely on supplies that come from outside the country. And so even though it may be producing a tremendous amount of oil, it's also possible that American consumers can be squeezed and find that prices are going up.
Will the U.S. releasing this oil from its reserves have the effect Biden is hoping for, which is dropping the price at the pump for average Americans?
I think that it will have some effect. I don't think that it will have the full effect that President Biden would like, because I think that the effect will be somewhat short-lived. In fact, I also think that prices will drop probably more because there will be some arm twisting from the White House on the oil companies to ask them to stabilize prices during this critical time. I think that the amount of oil that's being released, although considerable, is not sufficient really to appreciably affect the price of gasoline in the long term.
Well, this strategic oil reserve actually is for emergencies. Do you think there should be, or there is already, a long-term solution to the shortage of oil?
I think that the long-term solution is that we need to try to work. Everyone needs to work together to try to stabilize the pandemic-affected economy. There are questions of demand that have not been resolved. Certainly demand for oil has been down, suppressed because of the pandemic, but are we now coming out of the pandemic? Certainly there's pent-up demand at the moment, but who's to say that a few months or even weeks from now, things may change. And actually one of the concerns regarding releasing these oil reserves is that the oil producing nations, OPEC plus, may actually respond by reducing production themselves, because my understanding is that they are not completely convinced that demand for oil is back to pre-pandemic levels.
Right, and the pandemic and as well as the current economic situation in the U.S. actually are affecting American people's lives. So what effect will an additional 80 billion barrels of oil or 2.5 days of petroleum have on the U.S. economy?
I think that the effect on the economy overall will be rather small. As I said, I think that there will be a short-term lowering of prices. That may not actually come about naturally, but perhaps more so because the oil companies will want to be team players and work together with the White House in terms of making gasoline and other oil products affordable for Americans. So I think that it will help in the very short run, but we do need a longer-term solution. And so that either has to come from increased supply from overseas sources or increased domestic supply. And as you know, this is a problem for the Biden administration because one of the earliest things that President Biden did was to put some restrictions on the development and production of oil domestically.
Now things have changed, haven't they? And globally, the release of these 5 countries' reserves was to push OPEC plus members to ramp up output. They will be meeting next week, as far as we know. Will this put enough pressure on the group to increase production then?
I think that it definitely sends a strong signal, but I think that the OPEC plus members will be more interested in their analysis of markets, their analysis of where we are with regard to economic growth following the pandemic, the ups and downs of the pandemic. If they see that or if they believe that there is not strong evidence that we indeed are going to be using more oil in the near future, they will not want to produce more oil because that would depress the price. So I think there is room for some negotiation. Certainly, the White House will talk to those countries, those oil-producing nations, but it's very unclear what the result of those discussions would be.
All right, thank you very much indeed, Professor Michael Powers from Tsinghua University's Department of Finance School of Economics and Management. Thank you very much for your insight.